Hello everyone, welcome to the new episode of Unscripted Dialogues. I'm your host Aditya Sajwani, and today as a guest I have Jonathan Glélé Ahanhanzo. Is that how you say your name?
Glélé Ahanhanzo.
Ahanzo. He
Close.
he is an expert on African politics and he writes newsletters on LinkedIn as well as worked in the Treasury Risk Department of the African Development Bank. It's a pleasure having you on the podcast today.
Saying thank you.
Let's begin the podcast in 3, 2, 1. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let's begin with the background. You're half Czech, half African,
Yeah.
and have lived in many countries. How do you find living all over the world?
I mean, it's interesting because my mom is from Czech Republic. It was a communist country. My father is from Benin, which is also a communist country. So the fact is that they met in Ukraine 30 years ago during the communist era. They benefited from the free university system.
Yeah.
This is where they met. And my mom fell in love with that African guy. And I think that's the same emotions I have with Africa now is because I grew up there. So basically they moved to Africa and they lived in Benin for 10 years. Then in 2004 I was born. And I was born in Czech Republic just because of the papers, the passport, also because my mom filled checks too. And then we moved to Tunisia. Okay. So basically in Tunisia, it was Northern Africa. It's mostly Arab-speaking African countries, but I really love that experience. I would say that a lot of those Arab countries in the north of Africa are really advanced in terms of societies, in terms of values, and I really liked it. Sadly, I didn't learn Arabic. That's one of my biggest regrets, I would say, from that experience. Then I moved to Benin for 2 years. It was a really inspiring experience because I went back to my home country for the first time living there. So I knew I was from Benin, but I didn't know what Benin was.
True.
And I had the chance to move around with my father because he was working with the government, so meeting villagers, meeting politicians, meeting people from different areas of the country. So I've seen poverty, I've seen potential, and I've seen wealth. And when I've seen all of this when I was 12 years old, I was like, there's a lot that is lacking in my home country, and there need to be someone, or at least a group of people or a generation that's going to build it. And sadly, I had to move to Ivory Coast because of my mom's job, because it's a more wealthy country, really I would say beginning to industrialize. Yeah. And I think it's a good country to visit if you're interested in business in Africa. I would highly recommend it.
For sure.
Yeah. So it's French speaking, so you'll have to learn French. But it was really enjoying experience there. I would say it's a country where it's really advanced in terms of economy. But in terms of society, the interaction between classes are really easy and fluid. So as someone from the upper middle class, I could meet with poor people, with rich people, and that was really an enjoying experience. It was around football because that country is known for football, but it was really interesting to talk with people, understand their problems and their issues. And then I wanted to study economics because I understood that the problem in Africa is not a political issue, but rather an economic issue. We like a model, we like a development model, we like a vision, how to build the economy. And I was like, I need to learn more about this to see how can I contribute to that.
That's very nice.
That's why I'm here today. Yeah.
Yeah. Today we're going to talk about the Western African politics. Yeah. So let's start with the Western African region. How do you think it has influenced? Let's start with the colonial times. And for the audience who wouldn't know Western African region, it's a group of 17 countries.
Yeah. 17.
Nigeria, Benin, Niger.
And now you can count Morocco in it. Politically, they have made a lot of steps forward to get closer to Western sub-Saharan African countries, which I think it's a good step based on their geographical location, because now Western Africa is mostly created from a political agenda. I would say it's the will to divide Africa in different parts. Yeah. And in this sense, they are basically wasting our potential for development, multilateral development. So let's start with colonization. That's a hard topic, I would say. Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of history about it. I know the Western point of view and the African point of view for my country. I can speak only for my country.
Yeah.
Is for my perspective, we've been colonized by France, Portugal, Germany for a bit, England, and then back to France. I would say the best period of our colonization was with Portugal, because they built a lot of schools, they brought Christianity, which in some kind was, a bit going against our culture. But the good thing is Portugal was the only country accepting Benin to have its own religion and Christianity. And that's a step that I really like and appreciate from that part. So it brought us the modernity of the law framework, how to build a modern society through Christian values while keeping our cultural background and heritage. So I would say that for Benin at least, we are lucky enough to still have our own religion, which some people call black magic, but it's Voodooism, basically. And a good thing is Voodoo means light in my home language, in my native language. So I would say it's a language and a religion that people use there on the side of Christianity. So you get a lot of Christian and local religion. And that's really helpful for my country, and it's building a strong society, because if you look at the history of Benin, we've only had one civil war, which is a record in Africa, sadly. So this is because people are really bounded together. They integrated, exactly. They get along with each other, and there is no religious dispute in my home country. The only dispute was of political reason.
All right.
Yeah, it was the fight between capitalism and communism. And I would say that this is why I mostly believe in the power of economics rather than politics.
Yeah.
Because for me, the problem, if we consider colonization as a political problem, political issue, the only way to resolve this would be a war or a hard compensation, which is not realistic in my point of view. So the way I would approach this question is more like understand how colonization set us apart from our goal, and how we can, with what we have today, build a society of tomorrow that aligns with our culture and our fundamental of our civilization, which was the civilization of Dahomey.
So what do you think of the fact that the currency used in the Western African countries is controlled by France, as the countries have to deposit their resources, I believe?
Yeah, cash deposit.
What is your take on that?
I would say that it's an unfair game, because we're trying to play the capitalist game, but we're not in control of our money supply.
Yeah.
And if we have to put our deposit in France and let the Bank of France decide on how much money is going to be printed this year, it means they're in power and control of our economy. This, for example, can be illustrated nowadays with the tightening policies in Europe. France needs to tighten rates to reduce money supply. Whereas in Africa, we have different needs. We need more investment, we need more infrastructure, and we haven't suffered from such an inflationary cycle right now. So for us, it would be more attractive and more, I would say, smart to reduce and ease the rates to increase the money supply, because we need to fuel growth, economic growth. And this shows again that colonization might be over, but we're still not independent. We're politically independent, but in reality, in our system, economically, we're still dependent on the financial system as it's built now. And as I said, Africa is 200 years behind, and we don't have the same needs. We need to build our healthcare system, education system, infrastructure, industrialize. Africa is not even industrialized, and we're already talking about AI. So there is a big gap that Africa needs to fill. And I remember when I used to intern at the African Development Bank, they were saying that we have a gap of $120 billion a year in investment for Africa. And this gap could either be filled by foreign investment or just better exploitation of our own resources and ownership of our own financial system.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key goal for Africa, is to be able to build a strong financial system, highly regulated, where people would trust the currency, and where countries would be able to drive growth, economic growth, and then, develop Africa as a whole.
That's how it should be.
Yeah.
But do you think that the military rulers of these, let's say, the Western African countries, they have the power now, and in order for you saying that to take the control back, do you think they are efficient, or will they get, how do you say, lured away by the IMF bailouts?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because that goes back even to the fundamental of those revolutions. I call them revolution. I wouldn't call it a coup,
Okay.
because where we are in Africa is similar to where France was 200 years ago, England, any other countries. An old system that you're trying to destroy to build a new one, build a future for your society. In the beginning, it's always with military coups.
Yeah.
You have a ruling party that is driving that revolution, but not maybe in the right way for the long term. So where I'm seeing it is those military juntas are just the symbol of that, that change, that will for Africa to take ownership of its country, resources, system, and future in general. What I'm a bit worried about in the future is we're gonna see countries dropping sanctions on those regimes, because they see that the benefits they can get from those countries is higher than the political risk associated with it. And this is where we'll see IMF and World Bank play its roles. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of those countries receiving loans in exchange of, for example, political favors or filling a political agenda. But that's the rule of the game. So in general, I don't have anything against it. That's how the game is. But I would still, remind the population that these governments are not the best or the most capable ones to drive the future of Africa. They were useful, and I recognize their usefulness to drive that shift or launch that shift at the first place. But then it's for the population to take their future in its own hand.
True. But also you see that, suppose certain puppet governments instilled by, let's say, the Western countries, the United States, and they talk about democracy, but on the other hand, they're hypocrites that they cause the, the regime changes. What is your take on that? Let's just say an example of African unity. Gaddafi wanted African unity.
Yeah.
He called for a common currency. Later, we know what all happened. He's dead now.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't name countries because you have no proof in general.
Yeah.
I cannot prove that country has done this or that. But what I would say is there is a correlation, even a causation between the moment where they accused Gaddafi of building an authoritarian regime, and I've heard stories of him building concentration camps, which I've never seen picture of it.
Yeah.
But they justified this civilian revolution, this civil war, by the fact that this ruler was now threatening its own population. But I would rather say that was just a covered, media covering. The media were showing to the world that Gaddafi was a bad leader, dangerous for the West, dangerous for Africa, which in reality wasn't true. So what I would take from the Libyan story is mostly that we're seeing that if African countries are trying to take their future into their own hands, they're in danger. And that danger is coming from outside, not from inside. And the lesson we should take from that story is why African countries are not, there's not that solidarity between African countries. When that happened, I would have liked to see all the African presidents firmly condemning that other countries are playing in internal affairs in Africa.
Yeah.
I would have appreciated that African countries would have wrote a statement saying that African history should be wrote by Africans and not by, would it be the West, would it be Asia, Russia, or China. We have to write our own story. Yeah, exactly. So it's a shame that what happened in Libya, killed that momentum of building the African currency, building the African trade zone, open trade zone, free trade zone. But in the end, that free trade zone is now active.
Yeah.
We've still built it. So it's also showing to Africans that despite the risk of our countries going into wars because of external players, we're still capable after those events to build our own future, because we are building what Gaddafi was saying.
True.
Was saying, let's build a free trade zone. Now it's active. We need that currency. We know in West Africa we're trying to build that eco currency, where I hope that we'll move the central bank in Africa for symbolism and also for practical uses. Because if it's in our own countries, we're going to be owners of our money supply.
In charge of it.
Exactly. So in the end, Libya is now destroyed. They promised democracy, they promised future. If you look Libya today, it's poor.
Yeah.
Still in wars.
And
between four
drone
countries.
strikes by Obama in Libya ruined the country.
The country is now... Gaddafi built an agricultural system in the desert that worked and fed all the Libyan people. Libyan people were studying in Libyan universities. They had their own workforce, their own intellectual generation was being built for the future.
True.
Nowadays they're not in Libya anymore. And it's sad to see it, how the promise of democracy, how the promise of external players has destroyed the dream of a country. Because today Libya, you cannot even call it a country. There's wars between four countries. You have NATO, you have Russia and China there, you have Turkey, and you have a local militia, as I would like to call it. And it's just dividing the continent, divided the country. But I'm happy to see that the Africans still continued on the words of Gaddafi with building that free trade zone.
What do you think China has a role to play in Africa in terms of countering the hegemony of the United States? Investments, that's one part. And also we know how China is a loan shark and provides debt trap to countries. What's your take on that too? Because it could be the next United States and again take over the influence.
I agree with that statement. Is people in the West and in China are thinking that Africa will, that Africa wants just help from one country or from one side of the world.
Mm-hmm.
The thing in Africa is we're more of, if anyone wants to help us, we're happy for them. And since then, we're always accepting aid and support from Russia, United States, Europe, China, even India. Yeah, a lot of help. But nowadays, the people are realizing that we don't need humanitarian aid that much. We need development, we need infrastructure, we need technology. We need the technology to build our industries, technology to build our roads and infrastructure. And I think there is a shift now, because Europe and United States were mostly helping Africa through humanitarian aid, sending food supplies, sending some equipments from time to time, medicines. And that was creating a dependency of our systems on other countries. Which is a risk for us. Because it means that once your government doesn't align with them,
they stop the aid.
Exactly.
And you don't even have the facilities to...
And you're pressured. And you feel pressured. And I think that has brought the Africans to shift towards East and accept a different kind of help. Where, for example, 90% of what we get from China is mostly infrastructure already built, or it's technology like cars. And I wouldn't even call it help because we're paying for it, as you said.
Yeah.
And the risk there is also China is playing its game of debt trap. So the question isn't if Africa should accept American or European or Asian help. Asian, I include India, Russia, and China. Is more of what kind of help do we want? And are we able to meet our obligations? Talking about debts, repayments, and talking about aligning with the political agenda of the country that is helping us. Nowadays, the values of Africans aligns more with the ones from India,
Global East,
China, and Russia, because we are contesting that hegemony, we're contesting that world order, because we think that this world order doesn't benefit us and is extracting our wealth. And this is why we're seeing this shift towards China. It has nothing to do with colonization, nothing to do with the past, but with the future. Our future aligns more with the global East, as you said, than with the global West.
Yeah. So how was your experience working in the African Development Bank?
It was really good experience, I would say. It was really inspiring to see how Africans, educated Africans, are, dedicating their lives to helping others through the power of finance. This is what, attracted me to study economics, because I was seeing that as an economist, finance, you can have huge impact on people's lives. And I've seen those people like building projects, leading projects, fighting money, capital for those projects. At the end of the day, when you see like the report of the number of jobs created or the increase in GDP thanks to your contribution, it feels like really rewarding.
Yeah.
And I would say that the African Development Bank, even globally, is one of the best investment bank you can work for. They don't even recruit only like African people, they also recruit European, Asian, any kind of, I think any nationalities that is a member of the African Bank, member of the board. And it's, if you want to have a career that has an impact on Africa, you're interested in helping Africa, then I would say it's worth it, and I would highly recommend it. For example, last year African Development Bank invested more than $8 billion, and that's just one bank.
Yeah.
And that $8 billion is like 10% of the total investment we've seen from Africa. So this bank is contributing a lot, and now they have goals in electrifying Africa, industrializing Africa, connecting Africa with roads, internet, and they also have the goal to feed Africa, build that agriculture system. And now the president is a PhD in agricultural economics, and he's doing a lot, helping a lot of countries that are suffering from droughts and floodings, countries that do not have access to fertile lands, to build supply chains where farmers get their share of the revenue, states, transport companies, and it goes to the consumer, produced in Africa and consumed by Africans. Because he said that a lot of African countries are using their fertile lands, their cultural output to feed other countries. Usually the Middle East nowadays, to feed Saudi Arabia. And he said that's a bad dynamic because we're suffering from hunger, and we should firstly make sure that each African can eat, live another day. I think that's a noble goal, and he's achieving it, and the bank is achieving it, and a lot of countries are using the money, the investment from the bank, the capital from the bank, the advising services from the bank, how to for example, issue bonds or even issue equities as public companies, or even technical support. The bank is also providing dozens of experts in the field to help countries build the infrastructure needed for that development. So it's a bank where you have economists, financiers, but where you also have engineers, you also have politicians, you also have lawyers that are helping those countries prepare their statement, their pitch, their project, prepare all the paperwork so it could work, get investment and realize.
So the end goal is for Africa to develop as a continent.
Exactly. That's the main goal. That's the vision they say for it.
Yeah.
It's 2040. There's a vision 2060. The vision 2040 is the first step, whereas African are building a model that converge to the same future and as a whole continent. The challenges from it is they have diverging political goals. We have diverging opportunities. We also have diverging political views.
Yeah.
And I would say this has slowed back the movement a lot, but now it's getting paced again because we've seen tensions from the capital markets where rates are high, so we are not capable of financing our projects from Western capital markets.
Yeah.
There's also tension because our supply chain are being disrupted with what happened in Ukraine and what is happening in the Middle East. And this is forcing us to say, okay, now it's too expensive abroad. It's too expensive outside of Africa. So in this sense, it's incentivizing us to, get together and build that model because now it's cheaper for us to produce in Africa, to extract from Africa, and to export to African countries. And I would say that's a good move for the 2040 agenda. I'm a bit worried by the 2060 agenda because even though we're building the African Free Trade Zone, which is already active but still in development, early development, we are building currencies for regions. We still lack that institution, either financial or economic institution, that would set the rules of the game. This is how you trade. This is the legal framework. This is how you get the financing. We lack that institution that will make sure that if this country changes government or if this country changes goals, they will still follow the same rules,
norms, or
structure. Exactly, the same structure. So establish a structure for development that will make sure that anything could happen.
Despite any form of political instability, you still know what model to follow to achieve that desired level of growth.
And trade continues.
It's pretty interesting. So, where do you see the future of, or let's say, what trends have you seen changing in the past? And what implication could they have in the future, thinking of a time zone of next 5 years?
I would say that people now in Africa, the African youth, is fed up.
Yeah.
And that's a statement I could strongly affirm is when I've been in Tunisia, this country was peaceful, no wars, and at one point the population was fed up. They were fed up of corruption, they were fed up.
The Arab Spring.
Exactly. And I've seen it also in Ivory Coast because I went back to that country after the civil war.
Oh, okay.
And I've seen how the people are being fed up of that domination, of that system, and nowadays that we have, internet, they can see how people are living in the West or living in Asia. And they're like, why can't I live like them? Why don't I have the same opportunities? I would like to go to school. I would like to be able to treat myself if I'm sick. I would like to travel. I would like to get a job.
Yeah.
I would like to, have dreams, build my company, be able to trade, but it's not possible because the system is lacking in healthcare and education. The system is also lacking in legal framework. If you want to buy a land, take you 2 years just to buy a piece of land.
2 years.
2 years. I'm not joking. At least in my country, in Benin, it would take you 2 years to buy a piece of land. With the risk that the government is going to take that land back from you for a fraction of the price. How can you, build your business plan?
Conducive environment for
Exactly.
investment.
Exactly. There's no environment for investment. I would even say no environment for future. That's why once people get the most out of that system, they're looking, to go abroad. And as bad as it is, I can understand that because the system is not there.
Yeah.
The opportunities are not there. There's no way, apart from you having connections, having network, or being part of that political elite, to get your hands on those opportunities. But the good point is, people woke up. You can see it online. What happened in the United States with Black Lives Matter also helped a lot because it built that Afrocentricity view of Africa. So they're trying to build their philosophical framework, theory, concept, and people are now thinking more about going back to Africa. We've seen a lot of people from the diaspora during COVID coming back to Africa, and those that haven't are now investing in Africa.
Get it.
And just the part of remittances from the West to Africa, from African diaspora, is around almighty $800 billion. Yeah. It's a lot.
Very nice.
It's a huge part. It's like 40% in some countries, or the GDP in some countries.
Mm-hmm.
And in total, I think it's around 15% of the GDP of Africa. So it's a huge force.
Contribution.
Exactly. It's a huge contribution, and that movement is just, gaining pace. And I think that's a good dynamic. That's why I'm confident. I would say I wouldn't recommend someone today to go to Africa and invest because it's not ready. But in 10 years' time, I'm sure it's going to be, because that dynamic is gaining pace. And I see the goal and I see where it's leading us.
Yeah. Hopefully, maybe
in
in 10 years of time,
I wish.
you have the entire infrastructure set up, laid up.
I wouldn't say that the entire infrastructure will be set up, but I mean at least you will have the legal framework, the financial system, and the fundamental infrastructure needed to build businesses, to be able to extract ores in Congo, bring it, for example, to Benin, transform it, and sell it in Africa or in the world. And this kind of infrastructure is now being built, mostly by Chinese capitals. And this is where we talk about the risk of it, is the debt trap. Yeah. So I think the dynamic is good, but we need to be aware and to take small, calculated steps to make sure that the long-term goal is achieved.
Yeah. Great. Careful consideration of the factors.
Exactly. Be careful.
Don't take too much loan.
Yeah.
So do you see yourself settling in Africa in the future?
Definitely. It's a lifelong goal.
Czech Republic or Benin? Choose one.
Africa.
Fair enough.
Africa. I don't mind if it's north, west, east, south, southern Africa. I don't mind, as long as it's Africa, because this is where I feel at home. I also feel at home in Czech Republic, but it's different. And I'm in Africa, it's different for me. It's like
you've lived more over there.
Yeah, I would say the people are nicer, and I see my future in Africa. I can see myself living there. And one of my life goals, I would say the main life goal I have, is to help my country the most I can. Help the country develop, build a future for the youth. And I would I would feel myself satisfied a day where every kid in my home country would get the same opportunity as I had and would be able to dream about their future.
Yeah.
That's the aim, I would say, of my life.
That's quite inspiring. Not many people have their purpose known, are simply confused regarding what to do. Meanwhile, you're ready to sacrifice for your, not even country, the entire continent.
I would say I would start with my country.
Let's start your country.
because
Yeah. Start with
I'm
home
a
first.
I'm a small man.
Start
But
with your country
I would
first.
help as much as I can.
Yeah.
And the thing is, to go back in Africa, I have to plan it.
Mm-hmm.
If I go now, I don't think the opportunities are yet available to me. So my goal is to build experience, build a network, meet people, learn from others, learn from different countries, the West, Asia, learn their economic model, understand it, and see what can be applied in Africa.
Yeah.
What can be applied to that industry or that sector or that region. Because I believe that some models are more adapted to certain kind of regions
rather than
and
blindly
society.
copying it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I have a strong view of African ownership. But in terms of models, I'm open-minded. I'm still in my early stage of my learning, development, academic journey, professional journey, and I just want to know more, learn more, and see what can be applied best to my country or to that specific region.
That's very good. Yeah, you will need peace and love in this world at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any questions?
Interesting. As a politics student.
Aspiring politician.
Yeah,
okay, politics student.
As a politics student,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that the future of politics is mostly on the philosophical side or economic?
I'll say this thing, that let's say in India, since 2014, the narrative of the elections has been fought on the issue of development since 2014.
Yeah.
And that's why I've seen the current government in power. And it has changed how politics was shaped from caste-based, religion, ethnicities, from that to a development-based ones. So obviously, as a government, you need to back up the opportunities with the economic development. But I think in terms of philosophical side, you always need that human element to create that touch for the public.
It's interesting because I've read a book from Steve Keen's Economist, and he said that his main advice to any aspiring politician or economist is to learn mathematics and quantitative methods.
Yeah.
Because he said that if you want to build a model that works, you need the evidence to back it up.
True.
And as you said, from 2014, India has shifted to that development, focus, and it worked.
Yeah.
I would say it worked. We've seen like India helping Africa with pharmaceutical industry, with healthcare system, and even education, providing textbooks, providing advising on how to build a education system, and I think that's a good step forward.
Yeah.
So because me as myself, I'm also focusing on quantitative methods because I would say it brings you a more open mind, open perspective on the world, because you rather look for evidence than point of views.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's one of my, area where I worry sometimes is in Africa. We're seeing a lot of politicians playing more political game
than the
economic game. Yeah.
I think in the end, it reaches a time where the public is like, okay, we need to see the proof. Because then if there are social movements, and like we saw the Arab Spring, you see what happens. But hopefully it doesn't come to that point.
Yeah.
No. But I'm sure with the global south uniting in terms of sharing the resources, technology and the information, helping breaking the hegemony and making a multipolar world order, I think things can improve.
Definitely.
Felt like a politician for a minute.
Bring balance to the world.
100%.
It needs balance, because if it's unbalanced, then the game is not fair.
No?
Basic game theory. If you start with an advantage, you end up winning.
Sure.
Evidence-based.
100%. Yes. Thank you for watching the episode. Hope you got to learn a bit more about maps and also about the economic and political situation of Africa.
from my point of view.
Yeah,
Only.
from Jonathan's point of view.
Yeah.
If you have any opinion, feel free to share in the comments or
Connect on LinkedIn.
true.
Happy to
And I'll
talk
link
about it.
I'll put the links in the description. Yeah. Thank you for watching.